Okay, well, welcome everybody. I'm Shahram Akbarzadeh. I'm the convener of leaders of this forum, and we're very delighted to have this high-powered panel here to talk to us about the regional impact of China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Obviously, this is a very contentious and significant project that has far-reaching implications for Pakistan and the region. It's fantastic for us that we have a panel of experts based from ANU and also from Pakistan to explore the topic. To chair the discussion, we have our own in-house expert, Dr. Zahid Ahmed, who will be managing the discussion. So I think with that brief introduction, I'm going to pass on the baton to Zahid to take over, please.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. As Sharm has already said, it's a very important topic. It's always in the news in Pakistan, especially in India as well, in the US. There's so much interest. And in Australia also, there's this increasing interest in what's happening in Pakistan, what's happening in Sri Lanka with this so much Chinese investment. But let me first introduce this Belt and Road Initiative. What's that about? If some of you don't know about this. So this is a Chinese $2.1 trillion investment going through 40 countries, affecting 80% of the world's population, including 207 million Pakistanis. And I hope there'll be positive impacts. But the idea of this, bringing together this panel here, is to talk about its various dimensions that are often overlooked. There's so much, of course, emphasis on its regional impacts, but there's very less emphasis on its environmental impacts, its impacts on local businesses, for example, and its impacts on Pakistan's local laws and the legal system and the political system and the civil-military equation that we have in Pakistan. So I'm very happy. Thanks to all of you for coming. And first I'll maybe just introduce all the speakers one by one. And then as far as the format is concerned, I have a list of questions, in fact quite a few, and too many.
I hope they're easy ones.
They'll be easy ones, hopefully. And then the idea is to engage in a discussion for about 60 minutes or so. Then I'll open the forum for your questions and to have a lively discussion on these topics. Don't worry about the recording, but I know that we are used to being from Pakistan, with so much media attention, so we won't be worried about the camera facing us. So first we have Mr. Ahmed Rana. Rana Sahib for I think nearly 10 years. Of course, I was reading your work before that. I met you during my own PhD fieldwork in Islamabad. He's heading the PAC Institute of Peace Studies, very prominent research institute in Pakistan. He brought me this book, which is very important for two reasons. First is the topic, and second because he won the Peace Prize for this book in Karachi in 2016. So he has been doing this work for quite some time, has been writing frequently in Dawn and prominent newspapers. He has been on BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera. I can go on and on. There's a long list of course, Rana Sahib's publications. So very important that he's here to talk about CPAC and its impacts with reference to peace and security in the region. And then we have Moeen Cheema. Can I say lawyer by background?
Lawyer by distant background.
Distant background, and now senior lecturer at the ANU. He has, of course, interest in constitutional law, political theory, and constitutionalism in Pakistan, and has been, a part of this project on China-Pakistan Economic Corridor that has brought together this whole team. And then we have Hamza Orakzai. Thanks for telling me more about your work before the seminar. So he's looking at the practical side of things as far as the China-Pakistan cooperation is concerned. He's looking at the special economic zones, businesses, and the relationship between business community from the two sides. And he's a research fellow at the ANU and has his own office, his own business, I would say, a consultancy firm in Islamabad as well. And then we have with us, last but not least, Sonia and Qadir, who's, I believe later this year you'll be starting your PhD at the University of New South Wales. So good luck with that, and we hope to see you more often during your time at UNSW. And she has been a feminist activist, leftist, belonging to leftist group, and has taught at Pakistan's Lahore University of Management Sciences, very prestigious university in the country, and has studied, finished her degree at New School for Social Research in New York. So welcome to all of you. As far as the format is concerned, I've explained it briefly already. Next is that I'll give each of you maximum 5 minutes to talk about what you are doing at the ANU. Tell us about your research. Tell us how you're looking at CPAC from various angles.
Yeah.
So there's no particular order, but I want to start with Moeen, Cheema, and then Amir, and then the other two.
Well, I'll suggest, given the way the topic's been framed, I think you go first, and then
I
I'll...
think you're organizing all this thing here, so you have to introduce Ahmed. Thank you for the Orakzai for having us here, and I myself and my colleagues are anticipating that we will have some productive discourse on CPAC and other regional issues in South Asia and what's going on in Indian Ocean. And yeah, they are quite qualified, all of us and my few other colleagues, Nisha Khan and Hashim.
Can you speak a bit louder?
Yeah, this is the problem. So they will, I hope they will contribute in a discussion as well, because they have the specific background in development sector, into politics, historical discourse. Specifically, they deal in the post-colonial developments in South Asia and all across the world. Yeah, so the Moeen, I think, is
Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting us and for having us here, and we really look forward to a productive discussion here. So, let me give you my 5-minute spiel on this, and the idea behind this Australia Awards Fellowship, which has been funded by DFAT, I must say that as well, hosted by the Australian National University's College of Law. I convene the Law Governance and Development program, so this is quite interdisciplinary, as you can tell. Half of them are lawyers, half of them are non-lawyers, and even the lawyers like me are, as I said, lawyers by training mostly, and indulged in other issues, particularly relating to development and constitutional politics. So, look, as you said in the introduction, this is, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is part of the Belt and Road Initiative. It's a massive development program which is unfolding quite rapidly in Pakistan, and so from my point of view, given the scale of this program and the kind of projects that it includes, I would frame very briefly, my talk in this one particular way. Pakistan has a few, or quite a few, historical rule of law challenges. And from my perspective, this massive development program of CPAC could be quite, the term that is, we jokingly decided not to use that term anymore, so I'll use it once, and then hopefully nobody else will use it. But it is being described as, as a game changer in Pakistan. So there's all this optimism, or at times bordering on euphoria, that Pakistan is going to transform into this middle-income, middle-power country very, very rapidly, and stabilize and develop and prosper economically. But from my point of view, for that to happen, for the CPAC to be really a game changer in that sense, to be transformational in that sense, there are certain historical and fairly serious rule of law challenges that need to be addressed for the true benefits of CPAC to materialize. In fact, I'm actually a little bit even more concerned. In addition to these challenges, there are also what I would describe as rule of law externalities. So my concern is that if these challenges are not adequately addressed, I wouldn't use the term resolved, because these are long-standing, many of them really with deep structural roots, problems that will take a long time to meaningfully resolve, but at least there needs to be a serious effort to address these issues. And if they're not addressed, CPAC and some of the developments related to CPAC might actually exacerbate these problems. And I'll initially focus on two of the big ones. One is federalism. So, like many post-colonial states, Pakistan has historically struggled to deal with issues of federalism, and without addressing some of the concerns from the regions and ethno-linguistic groups that have historically been on the periphery of the Pakistani state, the real advantages of CPAC, economic, social, political, and also with regard to peace and security will not materialize. And then there's the risk that if these issues are not addressed, CPAC might exacerbate them and make them worse. And there are three regions in particular which are on the main or the so-called western route of CPAC, which have historically been more marginalized and on the periphery of the Pakistani state. And the first, of course, is Gilgit-Baltistan, through which the first initial part of CPAC comes through. It does not have constitutional status because there's a long history behind it, because it has been part of the Kashmir state at independence, and it is ruled directly by the federation, so it's not considered a province of Pakistan. The second area, of course, is Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, what used to be called NWFP, and the federally administered tribal areas, which, while not on the CPAC route, but lie alongside, the CPAC route. And the third, of course, is that Balochistan, where there has been, historically a long-standing low-level insurgency and also quite deep-seated resentment on the part of the Baloch, especially with regards to exploitation of natural resources, which have historically benefited Balochistan and the people of Balochistan, and where there has been an active military operation going on for the better part of the last decade or so. So for me, one key concern is that unless the benefits of CPAC and the various projects are a bit more equitably distributed between the more dominant Punjab and now increasingly Sindh province and these other more marginalized regions, this will exacerbate the tendencies for maybe secessionism or dissent in these parts of, political protest in these parts of Pakistan. The second big one, of course, and you referred to that as well, is the historical civil-military imbalance in Pakistan. And for any journalist, as Amir would know, it's impossible to write any article on Pakistan without that customary line towards the end about the military has historically been very powerful in the background, whether that is relevant to that particular topic or not. There's a customary line thrown in, but with a lot of validity, of course, because that has been the fact. The military has directly ruled Pakistan for almost half its history. And the fact that even when there are civilian transitional periods, or when there are formally civil democratic governments, the military has exercised a lot of influence or power particularly over two domains: one of national security, and second of big chunks of the foreign policy. Military is also the largest corporate conglomerate in the country, also the largest state employer. Historically very powerful institution that has exercised a lot of political power, either directly or indirectly, even as I mentioned in periods of civil democratic rule. So there's a risk, which I to some extent also see materializing over the last 2 or 3 years since the CPAC program has begun, which is that of the military being strengthened, particularly by this very strong, dominant, almost new nationalist discourse that is emerging, within which CPAC is a very, very important part. So the military seems to have been quite strengthened by, it's no longer just the guardian of the frontiers or Pakistan's influence in the region, but is now also increasingly the guardian of Pakistan's economic prosperity and stability. So those, I think, would be the two big challenges rule of law challenges that I would highlight. And then, given the scale of the project and its multiple dimensions, there are a whole range of legal issues or issues that have impact on Pakistan's legal regimes and legal system, whether it's regard to the environment or land use, land, or agriculture, or land acquisition, or competition law, or labor laws, or dispute resolution mechanisms. So there are a whole range of legal issues which I often get a sense people haven't really thought through, through all this euphoria about CPAC and the wonderful economic development that it is promising, and which was the logic of putting together this Australia Awards Fellowship, to bring people from a whole range of backgrounds and disciplines so that we can start to look at some of these possible issues in a little bit greater detail.
Fantastic. Over to Sonia. Can you tell us about your role in the research project?
Okay. So I'm looking much more at the environmental aspect of things, and it's interesting that considering that this is such a huge development project, the scale of it, that environment as such is not the center of this sort of thought process. Within the long-term plan that we have access to, which is a very sort of short version of the actual project plan, there is really no mention of the environment in terms, except for saying that this will be sustainable, the entire project will be sustainable. The other way in which it's mentioned is actually environmental tourism, so it's much more like we're making theme parks, etc. But even what those parks, etc., would mean for where they're being built, how they will change the environment over there, that's not really being sort of looked at. So, and I think sort of like at a macro scale, we don't have much to go on in terms of how this thing is being envisioned. So if it is sustainable, which is something we read in the newspaper every other day, how is this going to be sustainable? What does that mean? That's not sort of really being looked into. So there's loads of things that need to be sort of very different aspects of it. But just to start off with two aspects that I will just briefly talk about. The coal power plants that are being built, so energy and both the infrastructure are two important parts of the entire project, right? So Pakistan's energy, or the way we've made electricity, has usually not been through coal. Coal has been a very small part of the way we've done it. But to now, through CPAC, there is sort of, we're going back to sort of a look into coal, and look, Pakistan also sort of mining coal. This is Pakistan's own coal, which is actually a very low quality coal, and that is why it was not mined up till now, because it didn't, it wasn't really very, very feasible. So interestingly, while the world is turning away from coal, and China itself is turning, shutting down its coal power plants, CPAC, under CPAC, our projects are sort of relying on coal. And when we read a work by a lot of energy consultants or people who are writing or who are sort of experts on this issue, a lot of them are starting to talk about sort of a renewable energy as one of the things that should go into the mix, but there isn't any clarity on why the coal should just not, or why is the world really moving away from coal. So usually the argument is that for now we can sort of use coal for a while until we move towards, or we can have a certain kind of a mixture of these two things. So another thing that's been talking about in this context is the kind of technology that we're going to be building for coal to make coal power plants. So for instance, it's called the clean coal technology. It's supposed to be a certain kind of coal power plant, which will just called critical or supercritical power plants, and apparently new power plants are being built this way. But from what what I've been able to research so far, I don't think that all the power plants that are being built are using that technology, because it's very, very expensive. So it's also interesting that some of these experts are actually suggesting that why don't we use this expensive technology in areas like Karachi, and until that's not really that important. So in terms of how that imagination is also happening about which areas are important, which should, if there is an expensive technology, where should that be used versus other areas. But also there's also been work done globally about how this clean technology is really not that clean as well, right? So in terms of what is the science behind it really? And it's not essentially saying that there's not going to be emissions. It's just that you're somewhat less than the older power plants, and that too really changes depending on who's speaking and what do they mean by the coal technology. It really depends. So maybe they're just taking out sulfur from it rather than carbon dioxide, etc. So these are all issues that I think need to be thought about or spoken about much more in depth. Secondly, and also this is also interesting and important because recently Lahore has started to have this issue of smog. So the past 2 years, Lahore has had in winters because we get fog, but now it's turned into smog, and it's been really difficult to breathe for a few days and that thing. And I was part of a group of people who did a protest outside the Environmental Protection Agency and tried to get information from them about what's going on, if they know what's going on. And it was really interesting because we found out that actually Punjab, the entire province, has one machine to actually even sort of be able to see what the air quality is. And that machine wasn't in Lahore because someone had called for it somewhere else in the province, so they couldn't tell us what the air quality was. So it's really interesting that, if you're having this kind of project happening on one side, and yet your own infrastructure, your own sort of environmental issue, the environmental agency that is responsible for these things does not have that kind of equipment. And also they were very clear that, you guys are saying this to us, but really we can't. A lot of these projects, so we asked them about the coal power plants being built, and they said actually we didn't even get to do the environmental impact assessments for them because it's really, it's other ministries who are often dealing with these kinds of issues, and they don't even come to us. So these are the kinds of issues that, are really happening on the ground. And then similarly, we're having a lot of deforestation because a lot of new roads are being built. So what kind of, while again, a lot of the discussion or narrative around that is that the people on whose lands these trees are being cut will be recompensated, but the issue is larger than this compensation. Even if these people get market compensation rates, the point is how you're going to be altering the environment and also livelihoods of those people for generations to come. So I just want to bring that back to a much more of a sort of a historical perspective as well. So in Pakistan, and not just in Pakistan, in fact, this is a regional context in South Asia, and I think maybe in other common law countries as well. The way we've thought about environmentalism is very much has a colonial history to it. So conservation environmentalism was sort of imagined or sort of constructed under a sort of British rule. And the way it was constructed was also, it really benefits, it has the government's benefit in mind. So, if the government is going to be selling timber, so they so the way they're imagining forests, it's very state-managed forest, but they're actually not thinking about local people's customary rights. They're really thinking about government's commercial sort of interests in that. So so the laws that are in place are really, in that way, they're going back to that colonial history as well, and we haven't really changed those laws. They're still going on. And in fact, there's a lot of interesting, I think me and Hashim were having a discussion the other day about the forest, the very recent sort of fights around forests in KP, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa as well. And it's a similar process today too, that when you do these conservation, you say that these forests are natural areas. These are actually, again, coming from a very state-based perspective, and actually local people are protesting against that because it does not think about their livelihoods and their takes that into account either. So these are some of the issues that are coming up and will continue to come up. But the way we've built also recently, in the past, I would say 10, 15, 20 years, environmental law has started to be sort of considered a field in Pakistan. But I would argue that it's kind of limited and it needs to be thought through much better, because so far the way this has been done is that while we have some legislation, it's really been what we call public interest litigation. So that basically means that someone who's aggrieved has an issue, goes to the court, to the superior court, to the High Court or the Supreme Court, and says that there's been a violation of their fundamental rights. And although most of the scholars, the legal scholars who are writing about environmental issues in Pakistan today, they think that there's been a lot of good developments that the courts have read the right to a healthy environment into our constitutional right to life. But I think if you look at the case laws that have come so far, they're very limited in the context that most of them, not all, but most of them are really taking into very middle-class, urban middle-class issues into account. So people living in residential areas, how their sort of water, air quality is being affected. But not really so much, like I said again, that not so much about peripheral areas, not so much about people living in much more sort of from working class areas, or people living off the land. What are their issues going to be? So I think again, and also so one of the things that they've been using is this thing called so the way the jurisprudence is developed is to talk about this thing called the public trust, and that's coming from Indian jurisprudence. The idea is that the state will not give away or privatize all land or water because they're holding it in trust for the people. But I think in the context of CPAC, it's also coming up against another legal idea, which is the public good or the common good. So that is basically that if something benefits a lot of people, so we can give it away. We can sort of, the state can make decisions on it, which may not be in the favor of the particular aggrieved person. So I think there needs to be a bit more sort of work around looking into how these two concepts are going to be used, and whether public trust is going to be, the idea of public trust is going to be enough when it comes to such kind of development projects which are considered to be in the national good. So yes, I think I'll stop here.
Thank you. Over to Hamza.
Thank you, Zahid, for giving us a chance to talk here. And before I speak, I want to give my background first. I got involved with the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor on a very practical level because the Belt and Road project was announced in September 2013, and I got involved and I started working in Pakistan-China Institute, which is a think tank based in the capital of the Pakistan, working in Pakistan-China relations, different aspects, people-to-people cooperation, diplomacy, and different aspects. So I've been working for 5 years on a very with the Chinese companies who have been now contracting around 35 billion of dollars in Pakistan. So let's come to basics, because for me it has been quite a ride. Amir and I were discussing in Pakistan. So the new Islamabad International Airport got inaugurated just last month, and it took around 15 years to be built, with like quite 8 years or 9 years delays. And now we see China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which was being questioned around 4 years ago with a very negative narrative, because I run a page on Facebook. It has like right now 260,000 followers, and I had seen a lot of change in stance on the public narrative. And 80% of the people, even my own friends, my own circle, would question, because we have severe structural problems, governance problems, legal problems. But with the Chinese, if we see from Mao to Deng Xiaoping to Hu Jintao to Xi Jinping, they were one political party system, and they have very strong governance. In Pakistan, everybody questioned because there were too many power lobbies, there were too many discussions, and we had seen in past 4 years all-party conferences to different sort of second Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, which is the second biggest party in the country, opposing the project, and now we have complete consensus. Everybody is in favor. So with the Chinese, with the Belt and Road project, like Zahid mentioned, so we have different figures. McKinsey says it's $1 trillion. Xi Jinping says it's $2.5 trillion, but it's somewhere around 1.5 to 2.5 trillion dollars project. And if Marshall Plan was introduced today, it would have been like 250 billion. It's 10 times the Marshall Plan. So it's a huge project. It's not just regional impacts, it's global impact. And China-Pakistan Economic Corridor has been termed as the flagship project, not by the Pakistan, but by the Chinese. And failure of the pilot project or flagship project is failure of the Belt and Road initiative. So for us, we need to understand in the larger perspective that what I've seen is Chinese are open to negotiations. So when China-Pakistan Economic Corridor was introduced first, we had Eastern route, which goes through Sindh, which goes to the more urban area and more secure part of Pakistan. And then we had this public narrative, people from Balochistan and KPK political parties coming up saying, you know, we need a share, we need a part in this humongous mammoth of a project. And then the Chinese sort of engaged these political parties and give whatever was required to develop consensus, which also sort of gave us a very strong message. We are open to negotiation. So in China, let's come to basics. China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, people ask us. So I'm an economist rather than lawyers, so we have two lawyers speaking and now an economist coming in. We have 5 different infrastructural dimensions. We have roads and bridges, we have railways, we have special economic zones. Well, special economic zones, so 4 dimensions are roads and railways, energy, power utility grids, power generation, and then we have pipelines, oil pipelines, because China is also the biggest importer of oil, and one of the important dimensions of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is energy security to China. And then we have so all this infrastructure is being developed for special economic zones, and that's what I'm focusing on, because in past 30-35 years, China has been an investment-led economy. So they develop first, and then they have been, so the industrial cooperation that we talk about, they invest in the infrastructure and then they industrialize. So it has so far been successful. In China, we can take example of Shenzhen, which hosts one of the biggest Huawei, ZTE, and then Tencent. Tencent just crossed market capitalization from Facebook, which is now the next $1 trillion company. But when it comes to Pakistan, we have severe governance problems because we have issues like federalism, and then after 18th Amendment, we have provinces as major stakeholders in the special economic zones as well. So while the $62 billion have been invested in infrastructure to make special economic zones commercially viable, it's imperative that the second phase, which was announced just this December, the special economic zones, the 9 special economic zones that we have under China-Pakistan Economic Corridor are commercially viable. And so my research is on, number 1, openness. How inclusive is it to the Pakistani people, to the Pakistani companies? Because when it comes to private businesses, well, we all know Chinese are the biggest exporters and biggest trade partners, except for Australia. They have like a deficit, but everywhere else, well, yeah, the Trump is pretty pissed off right now, but same is the case with the bilateral trade between Pakistan and China. We have severe deficit, and we have FTA, Pakistan-China FTA, free trade agreement, under negotiation right now. And so these industrial areas will play a critical role, because when we talk about $62 billion investment, we also need to understand that this money has to be paid back in some sort, even if it's a greenfield project, because the profit repatriation, the money goes back. So how do we manage it? And it's imperative that these 9 special economic zones generate enough revenues for the local businesses, for the government, to pay back the money. So governance, openness, and then number 3, competition. Number 4, threat to private businesses, because there has been so far no policy. It's still under feasibility studies. We don't know whether these special economic zones are import substitution based or export oriented, because if the special economic zone, so for instance, every special economic zone has a 10 years sales tax holiday. In Pakistan, sales tax averages from 15% to 17%, and then 10 years corporate tax holiday, and the corporate tax ranges from 25% to 36%. Now imagine Chinese company producing in a special economic zone and are able to sell in Pakistan, it's going to make, well, my company bankrupt. So, and other manufacturers as well. So it's important. What sort of policy do we have? Number one. Then number two, dispute resolution. So far in 2015, there is only one joint dispute resolution forum, which is China-Africa Joint Arbitration Center, where one center is in South Africa, the other one is in Beijing. And so that is African based. And before the Belt and Road was announced, we have seen significant investments in Africa. And then just recently, because the investments, Belt and Road Forum in May 2017, around 130 countries actually attended with 30 head of states. And this was an important topic. Where do we go if any project goes south? Because Belt and Road is in honeymoon period right now, and everybody's like, yeah, we want the money because the Chinese have the money. And so far, 3 Belt and Road arbitration centers have been announced. One in Xi'an, which will deal with the maritime issues, and then the other one in Shenzhen, which will deal with the land-based arbitration, and then the head center is in Beijing, but we have issues with the Chinese law because the magistrates cannot be foreign nationals. So this is another area which I am focusing on when it comes to special economic zones, the commercial viability, fiscal management, because when you give 0% import duties and such tax holidays, there's going to be significant imports coming in. Do we have enough foreign reserves to manage it? Is our governance strong enough to generate the required revenues? And then if anything goes south, where do we knock the doors? So these are the areas that I'm focusing on. So far, 4 years, phenomenal pace. We have like power projects coming in online worth like $2.5 billion or $3 billion. It seemed impossible 4 years ago that such pace can be, achieved in Pakistan with so much governance problems, so much power lobbies, but the Chinese have been so far successful in negotiating, in introducing new governance structures, new decision-making bodies to fast-track things, because that's what Chinese have been about. Because in past 40 years, what they have done is centralize, decentralize, now re-centralizing. They have been on the trial and error basis. In Pakistan, they have done the same. They sort of throw the ball, observe, and then initiate a strategy. And if it's not working, immediately adjust and adapt. And so, for me, that's what I argue as well. Be as critical as possible, because we still have time to negotiate before we set up forums that are unnegotiable. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So with all this, briefing, and one obvious question is, who's really in the driving seat? Is it Beijing? Is it Pakistan Army? Or is it whatever kind of civilian government we have? So this is one obvious question that comes in mind with, the environmental issues we talked about. We talked about, federalism and, interprovincial sort of issues. We talked about, regional dynamics and these, the economic side of things. So this question is to all of you, but maybe from Mr. Ahmed, tell us who's driving this whole thing in Pakistan.
Yeah, I think this is a very important question in Pakistan as well. And the issue of the CPAC authority, which been discussed in the strategic community, even once been discussed in the parliament, that whether it's viable we have authority for such economic development connectivity initiative. And then there was the debate whether it's a military idea, from where this idea is coming, and who want to control all these resources or the projects. And then there was discussion, and the PMLN government had tried to come up with alternative ideas to confront this authority ideas. But I think it's somehow it has developed equilibrium in decision making, especially about the CPAC related initiatives and projects in Pakistan. And it has triggered a broader consultative process. And if you look at from Pakistan side, those who negotiate, initially it was the planning commission was responsible for dealing all these issues. But after this authority, civil, military discussions, they then all chief ministers of 5 chief ministers and the secretaries being involved in monitoring and implementation of these projects. So it happened after 2 years of consultation and the discussions. But from Pakistan, we can say that we have somehow the very representative forum who deals with China. We had the 2 meetings after this new formations. One was in Islamabad in November, and the last one was in Beijing. And the chief ministers, they bargained for different projects for their provinces. Economic zones, the KP fight for 3 zones and they get 2. Punjab was fighting for 5, they get 1. Sindh was fighting for 4, they get 1. Balochistan was fighting for 3, they get 2. So like that, I think this is quite representative processes going on from Pakistan side.
Let me add another question, like in relation to this, because you talked about this consensus, all of you, that there is federal level or at the national level there is consensus to let CPAC happen. Okay, let us not make it a Calabar dam project or something like that. But then I was looking at last month I presented on a similar topic, and I was doing a research on the Chinese embassy website in Islamabad. So I looked at the schedule of Chinese ambassadors' meetings. He was meeting pretty much everyone, like from leaders from opposition parties to Chief Justice of Pakistan to the Senate's chairman to Imran Khan. He had a meeting, I think, a few years ago. With all this happening, it seems that they are in the driving seat. This is the impression we get.
I think this is not some unprecedented diplomatic norms in every capital of the world. If the one country is involved and have a lot of stakes, whether it's a strategic, political, economic, and they do some kind of the public diplomacy. And we have seen that it's the UK and the US did this kind of the open public diplomacy in Pakistan, so they do quite often. And the Chinese embassy get active quite recently, and otherwise they were not as active in public diplomacy. And now the Chinese embassy also runs Twitter accounts, they have their Facebook page, they are on Instagram, projecting highlighting the developments on the CPAC. I don't think so that sometime what kind of the concerns, this is important, the Chinese have about Pakistan. They have 2 major concerns in context of the CPAC implementation. One is the security, second is the political stability. They know that if there is a security challenge not being dealt with properly, so implementation on the CPAC, specifically where the economic zone will be set up, Gwadar, and even the other ports that Pakistan is negotiating, the implementation will become difficult. Political stability is important. I think everybody knows in every development matrix is considered important. What we sense they are not favoring some centralized system in Pakistan as they have in China. What they want to pursue for consensus-based mechanisms in Pakistan, whether it's coming from institution A, institution B, or from the parliament, or with the consensus of all provinces and in the federation. So this is our sense that how they are pursuing the things.
Okay. Another question maybe to Moeen Saab, just leading this discussion, because there's, as Amir rightly said, that there is concern about security, and mainly in Balochistan, where, as we say, that the centerpiece of CPAC is located in Balochistan, which is the Gwadar port. And Gwadar port has been given on a 48 lease to China. There have been concerns from Baloch insurgents about displacement of Baloch people. There are concerns of non-Balochs moving in and making Balochs a minority there. With these sort of developments, where do you see CPAC taking us in terms of national stability?
Well, I'll differ slightly, only slightly, from Ahmed, in the sense that I think there is an increasing sense of that while China may not be driving the decision-making processes in Pakistan as such, but this really heavy Chinese stake in CPAC, and as Hamza mentioned, the sense that CPAC is not just about Pakistan-China relations or Chinese investments in Pakistan. This is the flagship project of Belt and Road Initiative, and so there's a much bigger Chinese stake at play. I think it has created a bit of a sense on the part of definitely some parties that China is the more significant party to be negotiated with and to be dealt with, particularly as regards certain concerns with equity in development or distribution of the projects, etc. is concerned. And that has been justified. So if you look at the whole Western route controversy that both Amir and Hamza mentioned, the fact that political parties from the minor, from the smaller provinces protested and were successful in creating that sense of almost nuisance that if these concerns were not accommodated, that might derail the whole CPAC program. Actually led to accommodation by a government that was principally based in Punjab, and not even all of Punjab, but north central Punjab, and some settled areas of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So I think there's that sense that ultimately the interlocutors or arbitrators of disputes will be the Chinese in Pakistan, particularly around CPAC related issues. It also seems, and well, my sense about this is a little bit ambivalent, so I wouldn't take a categorical position, but it seems to be that even the military has, if not shifted, softened some of its positions. So particularly there seems to have been a bit of a shift in the military's position on quota integration with the rest of the country. But not in Balochistan. I mean, the enforced disappearances and some of these issues are continuing. And then, but then on that front, one of the most interesting recent developments has been this news, and which was published by one of the leading newspapers in Pakistan, that the Chinese are directly negotiating with the BLA. And also possibly with certain elements of the Taliban, Pakistan Taliban, and the Afghan Taliban. So clearly there's this sense that protests, certain kind of protests or dissidence, is beginning to have a bit more traction because it threatens to undermine CPAC projects and success of CPAC, which brings China more and more as an important player, as an interlocutor between these domestic disagreements.
Let me add one thing. The China has denied that they have any direct link with the Baloch insurgents group in Pakistan. And what we find out later, it was a few Chinese companies where they're working in the critical areas in Balochistan. They themselves contacted with the Baloch separatist leaders, the people and the tribal elders, to get the security of their staff in their respective project areas. It wasn't a state initiative. Yes, we know that the China has a long history of having a relationship with the Taliban. Since the Mullah Omar regime in 1996, first they had established their first diplomatic contact there. They are quite very much involved in track 2 with Taliban, and they are part of the quadrilateral mechanism as well. Those who are discussing with the Taliban. With the Taliban, it's a bit different, but the Balochistan insurgents group is different. It may be interesting that this has triggered somehow the consensus in Pakistan and that how we have to deal with the insurgency or the turmoil in Balochistan. And recently we have seen a very interesting development as well. Not only this Financial Times report of the Chinese contact with BNA, but we have seen that one insurgency leader came in Pakistan, arrested, and then bailed out from the court. Second is planning to come back, and he may be arriving in sometime the end of this month. And I think this is a consensus process going on. Initially, this process was proposed by the political government, the federal government and the provincial government, and they had triggered this process. But initially there was a resistance, but now there is a consensus that if you need the stability in Pakistan, you need a stable Balochistan.
I think I would like to a bit. I'll sort of go into history as well, because when I got involved in 2014, by 2014 end, we had, Ahmed has mentioned CPAC authority. We definitely take military as the most powerful institution, if not. And so military, because to make, they wanted a one-window solution to basically fast-track things, to have better governance and implement things. However, we saw a significant resistance for the political parties, and CPAC authority wasn't set up, which means military is not the only stakeholder. Number two, when we talk about security, definitely military is the most disciplined in terms of, as compared to Pakistan police. They sort of contested on that the internal security should be arranged and should be managed by the military, and the provinces opposed it, and it didn't happen. So we are seeing provinces and the political parties as one of the major resisting force, and the consensus cannot be developed. Now you talked about how the Chinese embassies and Chinese ambassadors, not the ambassador only, you need to understand the deputy,
other team,
other team as well. They are very active, and if I were to say, if Canberra was to invest $62 billion, you would have seen maybe more active schedules, because they have larger stakes. And like Moeen mentioned, and I also mentioned, the whole world is looking at Pakistan, because whatever happens in Pakistan is also going to affect all the other countries, because the same project, the same model is going to be replicated. And it's imperative that the consensus is being developed. While Amir said that some companies talk to the BLA, well, I've worked with them. Any company, it's a one political party system. Any company that comes in first goes to Chinese embassy, gives an attendance. Then it goes to commercial counselor, gives attendance, and then they sort of operate. However, they also are very solution oriented, and Balochistan is a very important province which needs to be stabilized. Recently, just last year, we saw a cargo shipment coming in from Balochistan going all the way to Gwadar. A lot of talks took place because it was a gesture, and it was not just Chinese, it was Pakistan state involved in talking to these groups, because it's imperative that Pakistan is a secure country to do business with. Because like I said, if we want to pay back and if we want to make CPAC success, it needs to be a safe country to do business in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to talk to Sonia about how is CPAC any different from Marshall Plan or plans of other countries, the former European colonial powers and all that, because there's so much talk in Indian media especially about the CPAC becoming, let's say, another East Indian company or something, or Pakistan becoming China's colony and all of that. So I want to know, like, what is your opinion about it?
So, I mean, I can't really really speak to what exactly, if this is going to be a new colonization or not? Really, that I think we're going to see with time how the chips fall. Right now, we're already seeing that there has been resistance, and because of that, some of the things have changed. But in terms of just CPAC as a development project, so far what I've read and seen, I don't think there is something vastly different, except maybe the scale of the way things are happening. So we've seen these kinds of, like, when the British come and the kinds of development projects, big infrastructure projects, they start setting up railways, canal colonization. It's in some ways this is going to be maybe different aspects that they're going to be building up, but it's again a big development projects that are coming in. Whether that really starts changing, like if you're coming up with new kinds of legislations, or whether Chinese sort of other different sort of legal concepts, jurisprudence starts to come in, that remains to be seen. So far, that's not the case, right? So far on the ground, we're using the same kinds of the legal precedents that we've already developed. None of that is changing. But actually, I mean, now that Hamza was talking, I was wondering about how much of this environmental stuff is also maybe going to go into arbitration, and then what kind of rules within arbitration are they going to be different from what already have been developed globally in terms of arbitration. But usually we know that arbitration usually is very corporate centric, what it ends up being. So I think that might also be an interesting question of how, which sort of forums, legal forums, are going to be relying on for these kinds of issues.
Yeah, I would like to add to Sonia's. We talk about East India Company. This has been quite because being a post-colonial state, it's like very natural to think it's a colonization project. There is a philosophical part to the Belt and Road Initiative. It's pretty long. It's about shared destiny, connectivity, and all. We're not going to get into that because it's going to take up time. But we need to understand the dynamics when East India Company came into subcontinent. Subcontinent was like 3-4 times bigger economy back then. Invasion was a trend. They needed manpower. They needed consumption, and they had huge population. Spices they wanted to trade spice, but you need to understand, British wanted the consumption and the economy and the manpower. Well, China is 33 times bigger than Pakistan, number one. So let's talk about Shenzhen. It's $86 billion. Just one special economic zone in the 1980s, a fisherman village, now is twice the economy of Pakistan. So the reasons are way different. And you see, if the London or UK or Washington, when we talk about war in South Asia, does not blow back. We saw 9/11 and we saw destruction in South Asia. But you need to understand, unstable Pakistan means, or war in Pakistan means, war in China. And they're very concerned about their western provinces, which is Xinjiang is the most considerable area.
So
exactly. So they want to stay with Pakistan, and they're very new and they've been learning. So trial and error, like I mentioned. And if you see past 4 years, they come in, they talk to the federal only. And if you see now, they talk to everyone to develop consensus. So if it were a colonization project, we would have seen a more authoritarian regime rather than a consultative one. But for us, I've seen them being open to negotiation, and they have stepped back and then rethink, and then they take a new step now. So it takes time, but yeah.
Absolutely. Only time can tell, where we are heading. But let's hope for the best. So because the theme of the seminar was supposed to be focusing on the regional dynamics. So now slightly I'm moving in that direction because I know people will have more questions in that direction. There's one, since the very beginning, when CPAC came into being, India has its own Chabahar project in Iran, and since the very beginning in 2015, Pakistan's Foreign Office is promoting this idea of Chabahar and Gwadar being sister ports.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, and you can of course question that, it's highly unlikely that they can be sister ports, being only 100 nautical miles away from each other. So I want to know your opinion. can there be sister ports? Can the connectivity between two ports can lead to improvement in relations between Iran and Pakistan and maybe also India, because India is actually the bank for Chabahar port. So tell me, maybe starting from Ahmed.
Yeah, I think a lot of things are happening in Indian Ocean, and it's basically mainly the India, which is getting more involved in establishing the bases all across all the choke points of the Indian Oceans. This is not only the Chabahar, but recently, 2 weeks before, they have signed similar deal with Oman for the Deakin port. They will use it for the strategic purposes as well. And you know that in Indian Ocean, Oman is the second immediate neighbor of Pakistan, just after Iran. And we still have a lot of connection with Oman, the ferry service, daily ferry service we have for Gwadar and for Jiwani. Yes, we know that what India wants to be investing in Indian Ocean. For Chabahar, they want easy access to the Central Asian markets. Alternative routes they are trying to identify, and they are trying to utilize all the options, including the air cargoes, which been started last year between Afghanistan and India, and this is their side. But the Iranian position is, I think, quite important. How they will negotiate, and this, I think, they are basically playing with this your enemy, my friend is your enemy games in the region to maneuver their strategic political position in the region. We know that they were under section for many years. If one side there is Indian investment in Iran, on the other side, in 2016, the China has tested its cargo train from Shanghai to Tehran.
Yeah.
And they are negotiating the 61 billion connectivity investment project in Iran as well. We know that Russia is there. Iran has influence in Gulf region. For India, maybe they are using some pressure, as Jawad Zarif, when he was in Delhi in February, I think, and he once somebody asked him about Iran's relation with Pakistan, and he said that no, it was in Islamabad, and he said that about Iran-India relation, somebody shows concern. They said that we have the similar kind of the relationship with India as you have with Saudi Arabia, and we trust that this is your relation with Saudi Arabia is not primarily against our interest. So this is, I think, they are quite their diplomacy, Iranian diplomacy is, we know that they are quite hard in negotiation. So this is going on. Iranian position is important, but Chinese are reluctant investing more in the base race in Indian Ocean. Djibouti is the hub of the different military ports. You know that from Australia, no, France, Britain, even India is negotiating, the US, even the Saudi Arabia, all they have their military bases in Djibouti. But everybody is concerned about the Chinese port in Gwadar, or their partnership in Gwadar, or they are discussing with this Jiwani port as well. But during last 3 months, India has signed 7 port deals for strategic and economic purposes all across in Indian Ocean. I think this is important, and India is in search of the alternative routes to bypass Pakistan to access to Central Asia. but ultimately Iranian position is important. And even in the strategic community in Delhi, now there is rethinking is going on, whether this is the right approach to bypass Pakistan to get access into Central Asia and to create the choke point near the Gwadar and Chabahar to contain China, because its cost is very huge. And if you trigger somehow the political processes and you can not only get access to Central Asia, but reduce your cost as well in Indonesia.
I would like to add to Amir, thank you Amir for such a comprehensive overview. We have like a different initiatives. So nowadays we have a new initiative by the name of New Silk Road, which is Australia, Japan, India, and US partnership. And if we look at their initiatives, it's literally perpendicular 90 degrees to Belt and Road. So if CPAC is going south, we see India-Afghanistan corridor. And then if we see Middle Eastern connectivity, we have Mumbai-Chabahar connectivity. And then if we are connecting Central Asia, India is going from Chabahar to the north. So, but the question is, because if we want to integrate South Asia, so me being a youngster, under 30, I'm a hardcore advocate of, let's talk and let's forget history and, talk about future, because we can all decrease significant cost. And when we talk about connectivity, it's north, south, and southwest rather than, and there is no east-west connectivity. We, as a Pakistani and as a youth of the country and as an emerging policy maker, I would want India to be on the table, because we do recognize India as an emerging regional power, but India also needs to understand we have two nuclear states in the same region. They need to talk. If they don't talk, there are going to be hike of cost. Do we really want to go into that, and can we afford that? Because it will only take us backtrack us in future. And with China and Iran, when we talk about ports, we definitely, Afghanistan is a tricky region. And definitely Chabahar, if you look at the map, Chabahar is closer to Moscow. But then again, what is the Moscow's consumption? Because you need ports for the countries where the consumption is. So there is a potential, because China is the major consumer, and Iran, like Amir mentioned, I read in the news, I don't believe in news articles a lot, so, but yeah, they signed sort of $300 billion trade deal and did not have the details.
What about the ones written by Ahmed?
Since he's president, on a serious note, we have a lot of, we've seen a lot of articles, we have seen, so in 2015, the Iranian president visited Pakistan, and I attended this delegation of Iranian companies, 25, 30. They were so keen, and they still email me and they have invited me. They're so keen to do business with Pakistan, but due to US sanctions as well, we have been limited by the Washington to do business, and we have a very limited wiggle room. We are natural partners of. Just when we got independence, Iran was the first one to accept us. And then there's this religious partnership. There's a lot of, among the masses in Balochistan, there's a lot of, natural compatibility. But due to international politics and Washington's sanctions, there has been a very lesser wiggle room for us to negotiate. But with China now, with greater dependence on them and with becoming a bigger regional player, there might be more room to basically negotiate with Iran the partnership that we might forge one, a limited one, but yeah, because India, because we need to develop a consensus with India.
Absolutely. I know that I still have a long list of questions,
Yeah, sure.
and we are running short of time,
Yeah.
so I'll hold on to my
I'll stop
questions.
talking
I'll hold on to my questions and open the forum for questions from the audience. Azadeh?
Actually, it's exactly related to what you just recently said about Iran's and Pakistan's and their economic relations, and also China's impact on economy in the region. I don't know if you know, because recently in New Year celebration, Iran's Supreme Leader said that we are supporting national products rather than relying on imports. And I'm just wondering if you think that his speech would affect on the economic relations between China and Pakistan, and would impact on that relation, because he was so serious when he said that we have to reserve our national products and we shouldn't rely on other products, and we have to support our producers and laborers and things like that. And then some people assume that he meant because of maybe Iran facing another sanction because of Trump. So he's trying to support more national products rather than just rely on others. So how would you assess that his recent speech? Do you think that it would impact on that economic relations?
I don't think so. So let me tell you, if you go to Gwadar, I love Iranian biscuits. They have like a lot of brands there in Gwadar, and in Balochistan. So in all over Pakistan, you would find petrol for like in Australian dollars. I would say $1 per liter. In
$1, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, $1 per liter. But in Gwadar and Turbat and in Balochistan overall, except for Quetta, it's like $0.7 because everything is Iranian brand. And there is very close cultural cooperation. In Pakistan, I don't know, I don't think that would be a big issue because, well, we sort of import everything from China and other areas. We are big importers, we have like huge trade deficits. So we're not very, when it comes to economic terms, we're not very nationalist about what products should be used. So I don't think in terms of economic, we take strategic narratives very seriously and not the economic ones. So as long as these are economic narratives, there is going to be no impact. If it's a strategic one, if it's India related, we'll take it very seriously.
That's in our blood, yeah. Absolutely. Safi?
Yeah, sorry. Thank you everyone for your presentations. My question is kind of related to what Hamza said, but I'm sure it's related to all your speeches. Of course, Pakistan is trying to show a positive image of itself in the region. That, for instance, the cargo going all the way through Balochistan was like, oh, it's safe, and trying to show that image. And I think recently, Pakistan somehow agreeing to finally all the leaders, of course, part of TAPI project that from Turkmenistan goes to India, because one of the main challenges was how is the natural gas flow from Turkmenistan, first of all, it's going to get to Afghanistan, then how is it going to actually pass Afghanistan, go to Pakistan. And can we ever try Pakistanis that will let the gas flow to India? Because these are all the challenges from the very start, and that's why no international oil company would actually go and invest. But finally it happened, the leaders actually met. Yeah. And I think it's also another gesture of Pakistan to show that we can work with everyone, including India and Afghanistan in this situation. Well, I'm kind of sending a message to Chinese that, well, you can, with more confidence, you can invest in Pakistan. But at the same time, over the past few months, the campaign against Pakistan by Trump and how Pakistan really needs to, step up its game to actually, because of course, I mean, the way Trump has portrayed, I don't need to talk about it, that how Pakistan is really impacting the regional insecurity. So what do you think? Is there kind of a clash indirect happening between Pakistan and China over US and China over Pakistan, over how are we trying to portray each other? Like Pakistan and China trying to like play positive, the US is like no, it's not, it's still negative. So I think there's a bit of mind game there, don't you think?
Yeah, I think your perception is right. I agree, and this happens first time during last decade's ups and down relation between Islamabad and the DC. Okay. Every time the Pakistan comes under immense diplomatic stress, and it also impacted the Pakistan's strategic and geo-economic interest. And Washington was quite confident that they can pressurize Islamabad. This is the first time happened this year that the Pakistan somehow compel the pressure which comes from DC. And we know that this is because of the two factors. One is not necessarily we can say is the CPAC, our new strategic alliance with China, with SCO, with Russia, and we have somehow the economic guarantees, 35 billion already have been injected in CPAC projects. Pakistan position is different. The security situation is getting somehow better, at least statistically. So what we have seen during last few weeks, the backtrack diplomacy between Pindi, the Islamabad with Washington has been geared up. And our finance secretary was there, prime minister was there. Somehow they are, again, the Washington is incentivizing Pakistan for getting the more cooperation in Afghanistan. I think this is the first time during, at least in the recent history, during last year, 1 decade history, Pakistan somehow successfully is quite blunt term, but comparatively balanced his diplomatic relation with the DC, Beijing and Kabul. And you know the Prime Minister Abbasi is in Kabul today, and he is on the invitation of the President Ghani. And we know that there is one action plan how we can reduce the trust deficit and how we can develop our cooperation in 7 areas being somehow is getting materialized, specifically in security and on border security issues, the way we have seen the recent developments between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Yeah, this is Pakistan, isn't the Pakistan of the post-OBL Pakistan. So this is the post-CPAC Pakistan.
Shakira?
Yes, mine is a bit of a follow-on from that one actually. I was listening to you all and recalling conversations going back to when CPAC was not even a twinkle in the respective governments' eyes, and particularly the discussion of whether it's neocolonialism. And I have to say that a lot of people outside Pakistan and China have been investing a lot of hope in Chinese neocolonialism for a very long time. In these kinds of security-related forums where Pakistan is this delinquent child that Washington hasn't been able to put on a leash, but maybe China will be able to tame this naughty kid where Washington failed, and so maybe the Chinese big brother will, do a better job of finger wagging than the Washington big brother. But as a follow-up from that, also listening to you talk about and saying about China being basically a one-party state, so there's not, unlike some of these different forces, but it's, in other ways, and you referred to this, it's not an entirely cohesive nation, and those border regions which the Chinese government is very keen to keep under control. And that I'm just thinking of a recent story in Dawn about Pakistani men who were married to Chinese women who were going and the women being sent off to re-education camps. Is there any chance that Pakistan could become Beijing's naughty child, just as it was Washington's naughty child? I mean, and also, like, I don't particularly like this representation of Pakistan as the naughty child anyhow, but how do you think this external investment in Pakistan in China controlling Pakistan in some way, do you think that's going to be a factor at all, or is that just outside?
Yeah, as far as my opinion is concerned, I think you are familiar with the joke that Pakistan is the Chinese Israel. Yeah, and but external influence in Pakistan. Yeah, the Zahid haven't given me my 5-minute presentation. I wanted to talk that how the,
I gave you 5 minutes.
I just introduced my thing, so sorry for that. Yeah, but yeah, that how the sometimes external influences trigger transformation inside society and state. And Pakistan is somehow during last 20 years is under constant transformation. Before 9/11, we are constantly in a democratic transition. In between, we have seen the 9/11, the cooperation. We become again the darling of the US in the West, at least for 4 years. Then we faced immense security challenge in Pakistan, and then CPAC comes. Yeah, so in all these processes, what we have seen that Pakistan always tried to be to divert the external pressures. In 2002, when the Indian forces were on the border, Pakistan preferred the negotiation. In 2004 to 2006, we had I think the very cordial relation with Delhi, and there was a lot of CBMs, the people-to-people contacts were going on. On certain issues, Pakistan compared with the DC, is this a phase which has developed a bilateral relation, impact on bilateral relation, but Pakistan have preferred to be you can argue that these are strategic political choices were good or not, but Pakistan has resisted. And as I mentioned, initially Chinese were thinking is maybe easy because of all the long bilateral history of bilateral relations, deep strategic cooperations, which we have since many decades. Maybe it will be easy. Why they choose the Pakistan, the CPAC as a flagship? In their view, in Beijing, it was the most viable the project of the BRI. But they had to be compromised on their certain priorities in Pakistan. Initially, we see that they try to be developed more coordinated relation with Pakistan military, and they avoided to be have engaged with the political leadership. But gradually we have seen the change, and when I said that they want some consensus-based system in Pakistan, so this is what they have learned, and the Pakistan also have learned in these 20 years how to deal with the friends and how to deal with your enemies.
I would like to add in this. When we talk about the case that your 50 women sort of got imprisoned and are allowed back, so we have like post 9/11, and we had a lot of we also know ATIM, East Turkestan Islamic Movement, which then again was involved in the Western China, and then you must have read a report where the Chinese insisted that they had safe havens and they were involved in Gilgit-Baltistan. So there is still there are problems in the region, and we actually don't know because like I said, I don't believe in news articles much. Because
how do you get your news? Like,
but then again, because you see, different writers, simple language can create a perception about things, and I've read articles working on China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and then I see an article with a very different, I don't know, stance with wrong facts, and then we create a controversy. It remains there for 4 months. A lot of talks, a lot of roundtables happen on these things, and so for me, there are deeper roots. If there is not a problem, and if there is not, these women are going to be returned back because the stakes are very high, and we need to understand there must be some reason. So for me, for 4 to 5 years, what I have like pretty less experience, but it has only been with the Chinese. This is the first time I'm in Australia, and now I'm trying to understand Australians as well. But there is a lot of people-to-people connection between Gilgit and Baltistan. You can get visa very easily to Kashgar. It's a one-day job because there's a significant trade happening. So if there is a case where such strong people-to-people connection exists, then maybe they are involved, because we need to understand that that region has been used by the global powers to destabilize, and it's very closely attached to Western China, Afghanistan. We have Wakhan border sharing, and it's a very key strategic area. So yeah, maybe things are portrayed as not a trade, so we can't deny facts. We need to dive deeper, but we have a long history of instability, and it will take some time. So maybe we need to research beyond news articles to understand the dynamics and see, while millions exist and there is a huge exchange, hundreds of thousands of people going backwards and forth, moving between the borders, and then 50 people are detained, there might be some reasons. So yeah, thank you.
Any other question? Okay, Asim.
Starting from the regional impact of China, Pakistan, and then in common, I would say, economic corridor. The World Economic Corridor was first coined in 1998, and it was by the Chinese. And the last time it was coined in 2016 by the Thailand Eastern Economic Corridor. In both of these things, although there is no specific definition for the economic corridor, but there are some characteristics which are, you can see that similarities between all these economic corridors except Pakistan. The most important thing is that besides CPAC, all other economic corridors comprises of the regional stakeholders, not just 2 countries or 1 country or 2-3 countries. It includes all the neighboring countries, and it just talk about that regional integration and stakeholder development that's been lacking in CPAC. So how is going to impact?
I'm not going to talk more. So yeah.
Sonia may talk about. But one sentence. This connectivity project. It's not only the China is talking about, but it has triggered a lot of debates and about the connectivity. Pakistan is evolving its own connectivity vision nowadays. We are in the process of formation of the national security policy. India is of course come up with its own connectivity ideas. All these connectivity ideas are the developed form of the 70s, 80s regional cooperation ideas.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think
Okay, maybe I'll go ahead and
add a question
because I don't want to be between you and lunch, and I don't want people to blame me for missing the Friday prayers as well. So one last question. So we started from who was in the driving seat, and my last question is whether CPAC is going to lead to more conflict/chaos or cooperation at domestic levels with environmental groups, maybe standing up with legal issues and Baloch insurgents, maybe with conflicts over special economic zones, and also at the regional level. Where do you see, like a kind of a prediction? Let's see, let us become gurus of CPAC for the time being. Moeen.
Okay. Well, I'll actually even just exaggerate your question a little bit more. So when we talk about, one aspect of Chakra's question was about, historical links between Pakistan and West. I mean, there was a lot of cultural commonality between Pakistani elites and going back to again we spoke quite a bit about colonial legacy, as in not as an English-speaking nation, but as an English-speaking, elite, English educated elite, and thinking, from a lawyer's perspective, I mean, common roots to the legal system, a lot of common ideas across, about legality across, the British post-colony, and then of course the US, emerging as a major power after the Second World War. There's really big questions about, as more and more Chinese corporations come, as more and more Chinese workers come to Pakistan, as there's greater interaction at the public to public, but also private to private, or public to private levels. Language, not just understanding each other's legal systems or political systems, but just basic communication is going to be cultural differences are going to be more and more pronounced. So I think there's some really serious questions about how this will, this new level of interaction between Pakistan and China that that will happen through CPAC will really unfold, and we have to wait and see on how some of these things progress. There are all sorts of ramifications, which is what I said right at the outset. There's so many dimensions to this that we really need to start thinking about. The impact it is having on this new ideas about security is having on Safe City Project, things that you wouldn't even directly relate to CPAC. Safe City projects across the nation. This new push to make urban areas more secure, not just the far-off regions where there's been insurgency or militancy. What impact it has on the state's capacity to and tendency to do more and more surveillance of its own citizens. All sorts of ramifications that will come up. That is overlaid by this explicit security dimension. Big questions out there.
Yeah, so I'm going to give one sentence answer. So statistically, we're stabilizing. I think the West is running out of budget to militarily get involved in the South Asia. We have seen pacifist approach. Dalai Lama's function was basically, so the Indian establishment sort of told bureaucrats not to attend. So we see a more pacifist approach. We see Shanghai Cooperation Organization as another forum. Then we have BRICS, and now there's a proposal for BRICS Plus and BRICS Plus Plus. South Asia, it hosts what? 2.53 billion people, and that's where the new consumption is, and it needs to be stabilized because it has been unstable for quite a while now. So I think, yeah, stability.
Sonia, what do you think about the environmental groups and all that?
Yeah, so before I just go into that, I think I just want to make a small comment on when you were talking about Pakistan's image, positive and negative. Just this morning I saw, I don't know if articles are to be believed, but I think memes are really interesting. And today I saw this meme about Pakistan, because I think Pakistanis themselves are also very sort of obsessed with how our image is. So there was this, it said Pakistan's positive image, which was just a group of people in the northwest of the country doing these men, they're doing this dance in a beautiful valley, and then it said Pakistan's negative image, which was just a photograph negative of the same picture. So I think it's really interesting how we frame these questions also, and how now that the empires, there's a shift of global empire. So how Pakistan is going to fit into these two different narratives. It also is also how we view what Pakistan ends up becoming, whether it's an naughty child or it becomes something else. It's about those larger sort of power dynamics as well. And in terms of environment, I think again, regional impacts are interesting things to think about, because environmental issues are not something you can deal with on a very, very local level, although these resistances obviously are happening in Pakistan. So some coal power plants, for instance, have been stopped, halted because of protests by local groups. There are also sort of continuing protests in Gilgit-Baltistan, etc., because of deforestation, etc. But at some level, these are issues that are going to have to be looked at a larger regional levels as well. Because, for instance, when I mentioned the smog issue earlier, and that's not something that, so the air quality is not something that what you do in one city remains in that city. So what happens in Delhi is affecting Lahore. So in that way too, it's the interesting thing for us, whether as activists or policymakers, is how do those conversations happen? So between India and Pakistan, unless at this level too, or with China or Iran, if we're not having these conversations, or we're not able to speak to each other in that way, then how will we be able to deal with these questions? And because of climate change, and I think we'll come back to that at some point, because today in terms of security issues too, that is one of the biggest going forward. That's going to be a security issue. Our security challenge is possibly going to be more than counterterrorism. It's going to be climate change. It's going to be migration because of climate change. And that's not really, when we talk just about economics, we don't seem to think about these issues. Globally, we've been started talking a lot about this the question of the Anthropocene. So. How in this era of the Anthropocene, now that the humanity has changed the planet or changed the environment in that factor, how are we going to even sort of think about these conceptions of what the law should be or the environment should be? And I think a lot of interesting critical environmental law work that's being done is actually calling to change the very basis of how law imagines itself and how law who's the subject of the law. So not just in terms of like I said, that environmental history, environmental laws are very much based within our sort of colonial histories. So actually at this point in time, if you really are interested in going thinking about taking these challenges seriously, we'll have to go beyond that and think about how take like the human environment relationship more seriously and think of much more creative ways than what Western and colonial laws have allowed us to think through. And that might need different kinds of discussions, regional discussions that we've been able to have so far.
And Amir sir, the question relating to the theme of the seminar as well, do you think that it will lead to more conflict or cooperation in terms of Pakistan's relations with Iran, India and Afghanistan?
Absolutely. It's will lead towards more interaction within the regions, and which will enhance the scope for the broader cooperation. What the Sonia was mentioning about these environmental issues, and this is one of the example of the emerging cooperations in regional context. I'm part of one India-Pakistan Track 2 policy, which have finalized a project. First, they did exercise more than 1 year that in which areas we can develop the cooperation. We discussed a lot of ideas in disaster management to everything, but ultimately we finalized the projects, both the strategic, economic and the political lobbyists of the both countries. They agreed to to develop the cooperation in environmental issues, and it happened because of this mode. And they are going to initiate the lobbying in the both capitals by this June. I think this is the new challenges bring the new thinking and new responses as well. As we have seen in Afghanistan, where the Chinese, the US and Pakistan's interest is gradually converging. And I hope that it will trigger some further transformation. China has been very proactive, especially forming not only the part of the quadrilateral, but Pakistan, Afghanistan and China trilateral group, which is practically offered Afghanistan to join CPAC. And China is considering this, Afghanistan is considering this option. China developed another trilateral, the Uzbekistan, Afghanistan and China trilateral group, which is also focused for getting involved the more stakeholders, the regional player, for the stability in Afghanistan. And it will pressure on Pakistan basically to become more proactive in all these peace building, regional stability initiative. Iran is important in all of these regional equations, but all the stakeholders, they have their own concerns about Iran. Its role in Middle East, role in Iran, Yeah, so Iran is important, but most important is Pakistan.
Okay. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
everyone. It's must say, wow, we have covered so much in relation to China-Pakistan economic corridor, and I hope that a lot of questions would have been answered. Let us maybe have a round of applause for.